Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. I think you're going to love this episode. I'm interviewing Dr. Lindsay Gibson, author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. If you haven't listened to episode 168, which came out 2 weeks ago, you might want to go back and listen to that episode. These are two separate episodes, but we worked on creating this complete episode around how to navigate getting together with emotionally immature parents or family members. Even though we're talking about this in terms of the holidays, this is relevant for anything. If you have family get-togethers, family dinners, if you have birthdays, baby showers, funerals, anything like that, this is not limited to just the holidays. And I think it's an amazing episode. Dr. Gibson reviews what is an emotionally immature parent. She talks about the 5 hallmarks of an emotionally immature parent or person. Then some of the questions that she covers in this episode are, how do emotionally immature people get you to knuckle under them to do what they want? The emotional coercion. What makes you repeatedly give in to emotionally immature people even when you don't want to? And then I ask, can she talk about what makes you give in even when you have a bad feeling about it? Why don't you listen to your instincts when confronted with a pushy, emotionally immature person? How do you stay in touch with your true self and plan your actions according to what's healthy and less stressful for you? What's the best overall approach? A little mantra to remember to get through the holiday visit without serious stress. And when do you let things go and when do you confront? And I talk about a tool that I used recently I talked about in episode 165. There's just so much great information in this episode. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And I'm so blessed to have Dr. Gibson willing to come on the podcast. This is the 6th interview that she's done with us. These are the most popular episodes whenever she's on the podcast. So I just feel really blessed. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Gibson. Lindsay Gibson, PsyD, has been a licensed clinical psychologist for over 30 years and specializes in individual adult psychotherapy with adult children of emotionally immature parents. She's the author of 4 books. Her book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, remains a #1 Amazon bestseller. The follow-up to this book is Recovering from Emotionally Immature Parents. And the second edition of her first book, Who You Were Meant to Be, has been released recently on Amazon. Her latest book, Self-Care for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, was just released in September of 2021. In the past, Dr. Gibson has served as an adjunct assistant professor teaching doctoral psychology students. And I believe she just finished her 5th book, but we don't talk about it in this episode. I think you're going to love this episode. I think it's good for way beyond the holidays. I think that's all I have to say. And now, on to the show. Hi, Dr. Gibson. Welcome back.
Hi, Patricia. It's good to be back.
I am so excited to continue this conversation. Let's do a quick recap of what an emotionally immature parent or emotionally immature person is, and then we're going to jump into the questions.
The first thing to remember about emotional immaturity is that it is on a continuum. There are lesser and greater amounts of emotional immaturity in individuals, and it is a strand of development. It has its own developmental pattern, like your intellectual development, your social development, and the emotional maturity development is something that has like its own little developmental lifespan, just like your intellect and your social abilities and other personality traits. So you can be very intelligent, you can be very socially skilled, and yet if you are emotionally immature, your relationships and your life at home can be very different from the impression you create in the outside world. So I just want to make sure we mention that first. But there are 5 hallmark characteristics of emotionally immature people that probably would help to go over with everybody. And I ask people to just imagine a 4-year-old, because a 4-year-old is emotionally immature, but they have enough language to appear that you can reason and talk with them, which you really can't. You can for, when they're in a good mood and they're well rested, but if you get at cross currents with them, they're going to get very emotional and lose their stuff when you're not giving them what they want. So just think about an emotionally immature person as being like that 4-year-old inside. Okay.
Okay.
But they tend to be very egocentric. They have poor empathy. They have a really hard time putting themselves in the shoes of other people. They just don't think about what another person's experience is. They're not self-reflective. For instance, if there's a disagreement or a conflict with another person, they're not going to ask themselves, gee, I wonder what I did to contribute to that, or maybe I better look at how I'm treating that person. No, they're not going to do that. They're going to go ahead, quote unquote, be themselves, and they're not going to ask themselves if they may have had a role to play in the conflict. They also look at reality through the lens of emotion. So whatever they feel a situation is their reality. If I feel it, it must be true. If it feels this way to me, it must be reality, which you can imagine the amount of distortion that goes into that. Just like the 4-year-old. The 4-year-old isn't allowed to do something he wants to do, and he says, you hate me. That's because he feels like you must hate him. Otherwise, why would you cause him so much pain? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, they tend to be very avoidant of emotional intimacy, meaning that when emotions get deep and real, the emotionally immature person finds that extremely uncomfortable. That does not feel good to them. They don't swim in those waters. And so they will tend to either withdraw or even fight with you at that point. Both of those are reactions to stop the emotional closeness. And of course, all of these characteristics are very hard on a child if that's the way that their parent is reacting to them. So I just, always like to put that in context. It's bad enough if it's your spouse or a friend or, a relative, but if it's your parent and they are like twice as tall as you and they're acting like this, and you can't go to them with your problems, or you can't establish a good connection with them, a safe connection with them, that has profound repercussions for a person. So those
Mm-hmm.
are just the characteristics that are the most basic. But of course, there are many more that come about for different types of emotional immaturity. But those are the ones that are the most basic.
Sounds good. Thank you for the recap. I want to jump right in because we thought we could do 2 30-minute episodes, and there's so much material that these are turning into longer episodes, so my tasky brain is on. How do emotionally immature parents or people get you to knuckle under and let them do what they want? Kind of that emotional coercion.
Yes. Well, I always tell people that, people that I'm working with in therapy or in coaching, to not feel too bad about it if they are coerced into something that they don't want to do. And that's because the techniques that emotionally immature people use, I call them EIPs just for short, are very, very effective. What they do is they act in ways or respond in ways that make you feel ashamed or guilty or afraid or self doubting. So it's very interesting that when a person is putting pressure on us and making us feel guilty or ashamed or whatever. As a human being, your natural reaction is going to be to feel those unpleasant emotions. That doesn't mean that you're a weak person or that you're spineless or anything like that. It just means that emotionally immature people use emotional pressure in a very effective way and get you to act if you're a sensitive person. Okay, if you're also emotionally immature, maybe you'll just fight back with them and this wouldn't happen. But if you're an internalizing, sensitive person, you might end up with those feelings, first of all, whether you want to or not. But then we can always dig ourselves out of it. If we have knuckled under, if we have given in, we still have the ability to say, oh, wait a minute, I just felt guilty about setting my boundary. Is that necessary? Do I have to feel guilty? Is there really a reason why I should be feeling guilty? Let me take a little walk here, take a break, and figure this out for a second. So you tend to yourself when you've been put into one of those positions that you so happily called knuckling under, because there's been some kind of aggression that has put you into that position of knuckling under. You have become submissive for a reason, and you need to figure out what the reason is and then what you're going to do to reinstate yourself in your position as you follow up. But it can happen so fast that you are feeling too ashamed to stand up for yourself or too afraid to stand up for yourself. And we just have to accept that that's a long process of learning how to deal with that, because they're very effective that way.
And when there comes to that point when you recognize that it's going on in the moment, there can be such a shift. And it's not that you go from knuckling under to all of a sudden asserting that, it's like you said, a long process. But when you have that awareness of, oh, I see what's going on now, and this is what's going on for me internally, and I'm going to respond differently. It can be so incredibly empowering when that happens. And it's not that all of a sudden it happens and you do it all the time, but that shift can be really powerful.
Yes, and I love that word shift, because that's what it feels like. It feels like something in you moves and you suddenly just aren't in the same place anymore. You're not intimidated anymore. It doesn't matter to you anymore. It really is a shift. But that shift happens after many, 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 many times of knuckling under, okay, or being afraid of them or feeling guilty. It doesn't happen immediately. It takes that working it through. And then then one day it's sort of like, that's crazy. Why were they upset with me about that? You get back into your own viewpoint.
Yeah. I love that. What makes us repeatedly give in to EIPs even when we don't want to?
Well, they have this very effective way of confusing us. An acquaintance of mine called it brain scramble, that you can be around them and they will say things and talk about things in a way that is maybe illogical, or they go off on a tangent, or they get very emotional about something, or they bring in this other thing. And meanwhile, you are trying to make sense out of where they're going with their thought process, which may be all over the place. And you get confused and you start thinking, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. Okay. That kind of mental confusion and brain scramble will shut you down, because your mind kind of gives up. It sort of says, I don't even know what to do here. I don't even know what to say here. It's interesting. It's the same mechanism that hypnotists use, entertainment hypnotists. They do something unexpected or divergent from normal interaction, and you're kind of left a little stunned. You're kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
what just happened? Because they did something unexpected. Okay. And at that
Mm-hmm.
moment, you were very suggestible. And hypnotists use those kinds of disorienting methods to get their subjects into a state of suggestibility. Like you're really ready for somebody to guide you when you're in that confused state. And
Mm-hmm.
emotionally immature people are happy to dominate you and take you on a ride with their emotions or whatever their issue is at the moment. So we give in to them lots of times because we have been kind of disarmed or disabled
Mm-hmm.
in that initial moment of the confrontation or the discussion. And we feel intimidated and we don't want to get into a big fight or make it worse. Sometimes we even don't want to embarrass them, which is
Mm-hmm.
really odd because maybe they're getting too wrought up. I mean, sometimes people have this experience in restaurants where the dominant emotionally immature figure is getting upset with people or giving the waitress a hard time or something. And then people like, they feel embarrassed for them and they
Mm-hmm.
try to soothe them or kind of walk them back when really, maybe they should be left to experience the results of their actions. But
Sure.
there are many reasons why we give in to them, even when we don't want to, because we're socially trained to be nice to each other. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not a bad thing. It's just that when the other person takes advantage of your good nature or your willingness by acting in a way that is disrespectful or sarcastic or whatever it might be, then we may find it hard to defend ourselves or protect ourselves. But again, that's not your fault. You're
Mm-hmm.
responding to the way that they're acting.
Right. Can you talk about what makes us give in even when we have bad feelings about it? Like, why don't we listen to our own instincts when confronted with a pushy EIP?
Yeah, well, remember the part that we talked about in our last interview? We were talking about how people end up making us feel things that we don't want to feel just
Mm-hmm.
because they get us into a kind of a reactive mode because they get very emotional. Our bodies read that as a threat. And then now we're in a state of emotional reactivity. So we might get into a situation where we kind of know what we want or we know what we don't want, but we might go along with it anyway. We go against our instincts. And part of that is that when emotionally immature people want to pressure you or coerce you, they often do this thing where it makes you feel like you're losing your grip on reality. The
Mm.
popular name for that is gaslighting. And
Yeah.
what that means is that they will question your reality or they'll tell you that your reality is not true, that they're the only ones who understand what's really going on. And again, that kind of illogical projective talk confuses us and sets us back. It makes us not sure what to do. And it makes us kind of afraid of what they're going to do next. Because we
Mm-hmm.
quickly pick up that this is a person who doesn't mind changing the facts, going on the attack, shaming us, guilting us, whatever. We understand that this person is going to keep doing things to get their way. And we feel intimidated by that because what they're essentially saying is, I don't care anything about how you feel or what this is like for you. I'm telling you what I want, or I'm telling you how I want you to be. So our instincts may be screaming something else at us, but we may feel so overwhelmed by their behavior that we can't respond to it. It's kind of like we aren't prepared. We can get prepared. I mean, once that happens,
Right.
we can get prepared for the next time. But when you're caught by surprise, again, it's very hard to have your instincts take over when you're not sure exactly what just happened. I mean, think about
Right.
it. It's really a kind of a good response to go into confusion or doubt when you're not sure what the other person's doing or why they're being mean to you or why they're being controlling. It's not a bad thing to
Right.
stop and take stock, but it makes it hard to have that quick comeback and that, that assertive setting of limits that we aspire to when you're confused
Right.
and intimidated.
Right. And I think that when we don't have an understanding of what the overall dynamic is, we're so entrenched in those role reenactments that we just kind of fall back into that, and we don't have that perspective of a larger picture of this is what's going on, this is how I react, this is what they say. And when we've done some work and we have that perspective, we go, oh, going down that slippery slope, going to stop and take a step back so that we don't have to replay the dynamic that we typically replay with those folks.
Thank you for bringing that part in, the role reenactment. Yes, that's very important because lots of times, this is not the first time that's happened. We've gotten into one of these role things where we agree that you're going to be the dominant one and I'm going to be scared of you and confused.
Yeah. How do we stay in touch with our true self and plan our actions according to what's healthy and less stressful for us?
I love the practice of writing things down. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's been plenty of research on how effective it is when people use writing or journaling to prepare themselves or to process through things that have happened to them. So, we know that it works. We know that it's an effective method. So I really ask people to sit down. I mean, give some time to it. Don't do this in the car on your way to the store.
Mm-hmm.
Sit down with a piece of paper and ask yourself, what is likely to happen? What am I afraid of going into this, maybe this holiday situation? What am I concerned is going to happen? What happens every year that I don't want to go through again? And you write that down. And as soon as you write it down, you've taken command of that because
Mm-hmm.
you have moved that from the emotional part of your memory brain up to your thinking word brain, your writing brain, that is rational and logical and puts one word after another. And it helps to integrate the emotion, like the fear or the anxiety. It helps to integrate that with your thinking brain in a way that calms that anxiety system down. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Something on paper is a lot less scary than something that's running around in your mind.
Sure.
Yeah. So think about it, write it down, and then be prepared to repeat whatever your position is, to use that repetition model to set your boundaries or to reinstate a boundary that somebody has come across.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have anything to back this up. This is anecdotal, but I believe it for me. I think those of us that have ADHD tend to be highly sensitive extroverts. Still looks like an introvert and tend to be verbal processors because I don't often have the patience to sit down and write, but I have people that I can verbally process with. That tends to be what I do, and so I'm only sharing that if there are those of you that you don't like to sit and write or it takes too much time and you notice that you like to talk things through and you have safe people that you can do it, that it's just another way that you can use that process in a way that works for you if you have that, if you're just wired that way.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a really good point because, that introvert extrovert difference is huge. So, yes, but I do encourage even extroverts to try to write things down because I think
Mm-hmm.
it just is pulling in a part of the brain that can be really helpful. But
Yeah.
absolutely, especially if there's a lot of anxiety, like if there is
Mm-hmm.
more than a little bit of anxiety, then talking to somebody is probably even better, like you're saying, because the other person's voice is calming, the sense of having
Mm-hmm.
support is calming. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
important.
Just pick wisely who you talk to, somebody that really can hold space for you and is able to be there for you, because otherwise, if you're working through trauma, it can be re-traumatizing if you don't choose wisely who you share with.
Yeah.
Just a word.
Yeah.
What's the best overall approach, the little mantra or something to remember to get through if it's a holiday visit or just a visit without having a lot of stress?
Yeah, I mean, we want to remember that it's not all about them. They're not the
Mm-hmm.
most important person in the room, even if they're acting like it. And that you have an equal say in anything that happens to you. If you are going home for a visit or for a holiday occasion, what works for you is just as important as what works for them. And that is like the first thing that you're going to be asked to check at the door when you go into an emotionally immature family situation. You're going to be asked to make it all about them and for you to feel less important than them, and that your needs are somehow less important than theirs. Your rights are somehow less important than theirs. And that is something that you have to remember, so that you remember that I'm just as important as they are. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not all about them. They don't get to be the only person with an opinion or the only person with a need. But as far as a mantra goes, I exist too. That's something that
Mm-hmm.
you can say to yourself, not say it out loud, but say in your mind, I exist too. Because this
Mm-hmm.
sounds weird, but emotionally immature people, especially narcissistic types, they kind of cancel out your separate existence, and you are
Mm-hmm.
treated more as a kind of a object or audience or prop in their
Mm-hmm.
fantasy that they're having for the holiday or whatever you're doing on that visit. They really kind of forget, if they ever knew, I don't, that's another whole question, but they really forget
Mm-hmm.
that you're a separate person with your own needs and your own inner subjective experience. And when they forget that, they will treat you as if you're not important, but they also treat you as if you don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly as if your preferences don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, lots of times, remind yourself, I exist too.
Mm-hmm.
Another mantra that I like is polite and present. I am present. I am here. I'm connected with myself, and I'm polite. Polite is non-reactive. Polite
Mm-hmm.
keeps you in a good place within yourself. It doesn't pull you off your self-control. It doesn't pull you into conflict. It keeps you on an even keel. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the position that you want to be. Some people are like, well, I'm just going to tell them what I think, and I'm not going to let them do this, and I'm going to, speak up. And I'm like, okay, you can do that. Think about what's going to happen after you do that. Is
Mm-hmm.
that the way you want to spend your Thanksgiving, for
Right.
instance? And if it's not, consider being polite and present, but
Mm-hmm.
you know that you're not giving your soul over to them. You know that you haven't lost sight of yourself, and you know that you're not making them more important than anyone else. That's your true freedom, not whether or not you confront
Mm.
them or how explicitly assertive you are, is all happening inside yourself. That's what we got to remember.
I love that. I tend to remind myself I have a right to be here. I have a right to take up space. I
Yeah.
have a right to my thoughts and
Yeah.
feelings.
Lovely.
And because that part of me is so young, I often will imagine myself much bigger than the other person. And I often will bring in the people around me that support me to be in that. If it's a situation that I'm anticipating is going to be challenging, that my support team is there with me, also big, and the person that I'm afraid of being very small. Just to remind myself, because I think those are those young parts of us, and it feels like everybody has power except for us. And so, what do we do to kind of reclaim that sense of space and entitlement to be here, to have a voice, to tell our truth, or to be polite and present? And we don't even have to be assertive about it, depending on the situation. But how can we kind of grow that young part up so that that young part feels empowered?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that imaginative exercise of imagining that you're bigger than they are, or that they're shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because those people take on mythic proportions.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of history with them. And got to remember that if it's your parents, literally, they towered over you
Right.
back before you had any capabilities at all. Yeah, so
Right.
I love that. Good technique.
Well, I think there's that befuddling of, I'll say, like, I'm a 59-year-old woman, and why am I feeling so little and so afraid? I'm a grown woman. And that's for me, that's been part of the healing process, to kind of grow that young part up and to fill up space. And I'm a grown woman.
Yeah.
How do you know when to let things go and when to confront? How do you navigate that?
Well, the first question I would ask is, how tired are you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because if you're tired, and a lot of us are going into holidays tired, right?
Mm-hmm.
This may not be the time when you want to confront people or not let things slide. This may not
Sure.
be the occasion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about that. I think about the person who feels badly that they're not being assertive enough with dominating types or self-centered
Mm.
types. They wish that they could be more forceful and stand up for themselves more, and like you say, like, take up more space, keep their own position better. And that's all fine to aspire to. But if you're not feeling it, if you're not feeling strong, or you're not feeling like you have a lot of energy, you're not feeling particularly self-confident, and maybe you're feeling
Mm-hmm.
tired, or maybe you're feeling a little scared, it's okay to let things go. I mean, we're not
Mm-hmm.
in a race here. And we certainly aren't about making you feel bad about yourself for not being a certain way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know what these people are like. You know what these people are like. And you're doing a great job just trying to interact with them in the first place.
Yeah.
So I always encourage people to first take their own temperature, so to speak, see if they feel like getting into a limit setting session with somebody, and when maybe they just want to let it go because they don't feel like
Mm-hmm.
struggling with them anymore this time. But you can also ask yourself, how in touch with myself am I? Like, some days you feel so present in your own body, and you just feel self-confident, and you feel like your thoughts are clear. And that's a great way to go in and maybe confront somebody when you're clear, neutral, and calm, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you wake up that morning, you're a little off balance, you don't feel quite right, you maybe didn't sleep real well, you have something that's kind of worrying you, that may not be the best time to try to confront. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably not in the right kind of mindset to be able to stay neutral enough to have a good, or, what I mean by that is to have an effective interaction with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the question becomes, are you able to stay neutral if the other person gets reactive? Do you have that centeredness and that calmness to stay neutral, even if the other person gets reactive? And can you stay focused and confident, even if they react to you in a way that, might be very emotional or might be shaming. And if that's true, if you can retain your neutrality, then I would say absolutely go for it. You're well positioned to confront them about something or to talk with them about something. But if you're feeling reactive to begin with, you have to ask yourself, is this the best time for me? And you can ask yourself, am I just avoiding this thing that needs to be talked about because I'm scared? In which case, maybe I just need to push through this to bring this up. Maybe it's time sensitive, something like that. But in general, I think it's all about how balanced and confident and calm and neutral you are within yourself that's going to make the difference in how that confrontation or that talk goes with the other person. So we have to know where we're at first.
I love those concrete benchmarks that you can check in with yourself. And I guess what I would say is to the listener, check in with yourself right now. Scale of 1 to 5. If 5 is I'd be ready to do it right now, and 0 is like not today. Where are you at? And I think that's good to just do those check-ins so that we kind of have a sense of where are we at today. Not that you have to use it on a daily basis, but just to increase that self-awareness of how grounded and integrated am I today? Am I more tired? Is today not a day? Just to cultivate that self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lindsay, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to bring up?
I just want people to keep in mind that the emotionally immature person has a very typical kind of emotional relationship system that they engage in with everybody. And what they try to do is they try to get you to treat them in such a way that they feel good about themselves. That is, that they feel like a good person. They have their self-esteem is supported. And then the second thing is they want you to emotionally stabilize them. So they want you to soothe them, calm them, make them feel better, contain them, even give them some parameters for self-control. But just like the 4-year-old needs to feel like they're good, and they need to feel like somebody's taking care of them, somebody's helping to stabilize them. And you could make a life career out of a relationship with an emotionally immature person who is using you, borrowing from your maturity to take care of those very, very basic psychological needs. And so we have to realize that that's what they do. And when we get drawn into that, it's not going to feel good. And we can begin to extricate ourselves by listening to our instincts and listening to when we feel like we're getting exhausted or we're being drained by them. So I just bring that up at the end here, because you will notice, once you see what they're doing, you will notice that. You'll notice that I have to think about their self-esteem and support that. I have to think about their emotional stability, and I have to make sure that that is, in good shape. Once you see that, you then have the freedom to step back from being in that role with them, because that is not your job to be their emotional stabilization. It's your job when you have a 4-year-old. Absolutely.
Right.
It's not your job when it's an older person or an adult in your life.
Right. It's like you're an emotional support person that's feeding somebody that has a bottomless pit.
Yes.
And I think our expectation is when we're in relationship with people that are relatively healthy and emotionally mature, somebody has a need for reassurance, we reassure them, and that need is met, and we move on to the next thing. But what happens with an emotionally immature person is there's a hole in the bucket, and no matter how much you put in, there's never a place of satiation. And if you don't recognize it, like you said, you will be the emotional support person in perpetuity.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah. Lindsay, where can people find you?
Yeah, if people want to get in touch with me, the easiest way to do that is just to Google Lindsay C. Gibson, PsyD. You can find a contact number there. And then if you want more information about myself and what I do, you can go to my website, which is Dr. Lindsay with an A, drlindsaygibson.com. And there'll be information there about my books, and there's a blog and some articles and things like that.
Thank you so much for being here today. I love when we have these conversations. People tell me how much they love every time you're on the podcast. I'm so grateful that you're willing to take the time and show up and share with the listeners because you have so much wisdom.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure, and I always love it when I get to be on your show because I just enjoy the conversation so much.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Dr. Gibson. I really appreciate it. Anything else before we go?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Have a great day.
Okay, take care.
Hey again. So I'm curious, what did you think? Did you get some stuff out of that you think is going to be helpful? If you want to shoot me an email, I always love hearing your stories. I love hearing what works about the podcast. If there are things that you'd like to hear more about, things that aren't working for you, always love hearing your feedback. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. If you're interested in working with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I, at this point, have a couple spots open. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, but I've moved to a coaching model, so I work with people all over the world. If you have questions about relationships, boundaries, learning more about the trait, codependency, learning to be more assertive, being more confident, learning how to have big feelings, how to navigate parenting, a lot of executive dysfunction. Those are just a couple. The next online HSP course will be starting in February of 2023. It's going to run from February 6th through April 17th. It's a 10-week course. Registration will open up on my website around January 11th. You can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com and go to the HSP groups page. There are little short 1-minute audio clips from people that have taken the course. There's a video of some people that have taken the course. There's a sampling of podcast episodes that I've done with people that have taken the course. We talk about the trait, what it's like, perfectionism, boundaries, learning to have big feels, turning the things that you've been told are wrong with you into your strengths and superpowers, creating a lifestyle that honors the HSP, communication, authenticity, vulnerability. Many people haven't had the opportunity to be with other people that are wired like them. And often when we think of groups, we go, ugh, who's going to get me? Who's going to understand me? I'll tell you, I'm a little bit hesitant when I join groups. Am I going to fit in? Am I going to belong? Am I going to feel like the oddball, the outcast, the misfit? I really do my best to screen for these groups. They tend to create some great connections. Some groups have gone on to continue to meet for a year, 2 years. I believe this is the 5th year that I'm teaching these courses. Jen and I came up with the curriculum together. They're incredibly powerful. And if you're looking for a sense of connection to learn more about the trait, to be in a safe environment, I think these are incredibly powerful. I think that's all I have. We are screaming into the end of the year. I hope you are doing well. I hope you feel nourished, supported, that you're having time to rest. It can be an incredibly overstimulating time of the year with lots of food and people and activities and expectations. My hope is that you're taking time to rest and to nurture and take care of yourself and enjoying the get-togethers if that's something that you enjoy. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a blessed day.